getting started here in a minute or two. Thanks to all those who have joined so far. This will be the summer 2019 presentation for SWEEP Allies on utility energy efficiency policies and programs in the Southwest. So let's just wait a minute or two, and hopefully a few more allies will be able to join. Okay, I think I'll get started. So again, this is Howard Geller from the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. Welcome to our summer 2019 webinar for SWEEP Allies to update everyone on recent developments and prospects for utility energy efficiency policies and programs in the Southwest. Feel free to ask questions as I go along. I'll try to keep an eye out for questions and answer them as they come up. But let's get into it. So the first chart is showing trends in total funding for utility DSM programs, energy efficiency and demand response programs by state and by year. This includes some of the smaller utilities that have efficiency and DSM programs, as well as the major investor-owned utilities. And we can see here that there was a bit of a downturn in funding in the last couple of years. Total funding was getting close to $400 million per year back in 2014, and it's kind of slipped a bit here. And in 2018, actually, the chart is showing funding of around $375 million. We got some adjusted data in the past week that suggests the total funding was only about $360 to $365 million. And most of the reduction is due to some changes in Arizona, which I will talk about a bit later in the presentation. This next chart shows the first year energy savings from programs implemented each year, 2008 through 2018, by the top 7 utilities in our region. 3 of the utilities, APS, Tucson Electric Power, and Salt River Project, are in Arizona. Xcel Energy in Colorado, Rocky Mountain Power in Utah, NV Energy in Nevada, and PNM, Public Service in New Mexico, the largest utility in New Mexico. And with the reduction in funding in 2018, there was also a decline in first year energy savings for the 7 utilities as a whole, a bit of a drop from the levels in the last couple of years. Total savings was fairly flat between 2015 and 2017, but mainly due to reduced funding and some cutbacks in programs in Arizona, particularly at APS and TEP. There was a drop in first year energy savings for the 7 utilities as a whole. And finally, this rather complicated chart is showing first year energy savings as a percent of sales by program year. So for each year and each utility, there's a dot on the chart showing savings as a percent of sales. Looking at 2018, our leading utility by far was the Salt River Project, which had reached about 2% savings per year, and they were actually up a bit in 2018 relative to 2016 and 2017. SRP's programs include an estimate of savings from their prepay metering program, which is one of the reasons they have such a high level of savings. So that's accounting for about a quarter of the total savings at SRP, a quarter to a third of the total savings. Just wanted to note that. Then the orange line is Xcel in Colorado, and they moved up to about 1.5% savings as a percent of sales from their programs in 2018. And that's net savings. Some of these utilities report gross savings, some report net savings. It's savings as reported, so it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison, but Xcel is a utility that reports net savings, has goals that are defined in terms of net savings, and their programs and savings are in the upswing. Then looking, going down in 2018, there are three utilities that are around 1% savings. APS with its cutbacks and actual elimination of some programs dropped substantially. They were achieving about 1.7% savings as of 2017, and that dropped off to only about 1% savings in 2018. There was also drop off in the last couple of years at Tucson Electric Power. And then Rocky Mountain Power in Utah, they had been moving up. That's the kind of the blue line in the middle, light blue line. They had moved up to close to 1.5% savings, but they too reduced some of their programs and their budget a bit in 2018 and only achieved about 1.1% savings. And then we have two utilities, NV Energy and PNM, that have been hovering around 0.8 to 1% savings over the past 5 years or so, and they continued at those levels in 2018. Okay, I'm now going to talk for 1 minute about what's going on with gas utilities in our region. Here is a table showing the principal gas utilities with energy efficiency programs: New Mexico Gas Company, Dominion Gas in Utah, which used to be Questar Gas until Questar was purchased by Dominion. Southwest Gas is the primary gas utility in Arizona, and Xcel Energy, which is a dual fuel utility in Colorado. And the gas programs of these four utilities, total funding reached about $51 million in 2018, and total savings was a little over 2 million decatherms. That's first year energy savings, with about half of the total coming from Dominion Gas in Utah, the leading utility in the region, leading gas utility in the region with respect to energy efficiency programs. Okay, I'm now going to move into a discussion of key policy and program issues and developments state by state, starting with Arizona. And as I've noted, APS and TEP reduce their efficiency programs, funding levels, and energy savings achieved in 2018. while SRP conversely had a bump up in savings for their fiscal years 18 and 19. SRP operates on a fiscal year that begins and ends May 1. So they've just begun their fiscal year 2020. They've completed fiscal year 2019. And things are in good shape with SRP. They're not in such great shape with APS and TEP, the two regulated utilities in Arizona. SRP is a self-governed utility, not regulated by the commission. In the last 6 months, we've gotten an approval for Tucson Electric Power's 2018 DSM plan, finally approved. I believe it was in January of 2019. That does restore funding for efficiency programs. So TEP is restarting some programs and expanding its marketing, and we should see a rebound in energy savings from TEP's programs in 2019. APS, on the other hand, still does not have an approved 2018 DSM plan. They went ahead and implemented some of the changes that they had proposed without a formal approval. And we've been waiting for that plan, as well as potentially their 2019 plan, which they filed last September, to be taken up by the commission in Arizona. The commission in Arizona is always behind in its deliberations. The staff is underfunded and overworked, and there's often significant time delays and lags in approval of policies that are before the commission. Their plan includes reduced funding and some reallocation of funds away from efficiency programs and towards DR programs, and also funding dedicated to electric vehicle support, EV charging infrastructure, and incentives for certain types of electric vehicles, such as electric school buses. So that's where APS is proposing to go, and starting to go in terms of their overall DSM portfolio. Of course, SWEEP is doing whatever we can to push back. We are trying our best and reaching out to allies and to colleagues to put as much pressure as possible on the commission to not support the elimination of what we believe are still cost-effective programs in residential and commercial lighting and high efficiency air conditioning and commercial refrigeration, which is some of the areas the utility is cutting back its efforts. And we think that one of these months here, we're going to get some decision from the commission in Arizona. We're also working behind the scenes with the leadership of APS, and have seen some willingness in recent months on the part of the leadership of the utility to at least mitigate the program reductions and maintain efficiency programs funded at a somewhat higher level than the utility had put into their 2018 plan. So we're kind of guardedly optimistic that we're going to get some restoration of funding and be able to see energy savings rebound to some degree with APS in the next year or so. And then last but not least, earlier this month, the board of the Salt River Project approved goals in a broad range of areas out to the year 2035, including goals for energy efficiency programs, demand response, electric vehicles, and carbon emissions targets out to 2035. And we were successful in our work with the utility to convince them to support strong efficiency, demand response, and electric vehicle goals that should lead to robust programs and funding levels for years to come. The energy savings targets are at least as great as what the utility's been achieving in recent years, and the utility is actually committed to a bit of an increase in funding for efficiency programs, while at the same time expanding support for demand response in electric vehicles. So that was a very positive outcome. I don't see any questions yet. Again, feel free to type in questions as I go along, and I'll do my best to answer them as they come up. Okay, let me move on here to Colorado. And as I noted earlier, the funding and savings picture with Xcel Energy is quite positive. The Colorado Commission approved new energy savings goals for Xcel Energy last year in a docket that was completed in 2018. The goal is a 500 gigawatt hour per year first year energy savings goal for 2019 through 2023 for 5 years. And that goal is 25% greater than the previous goal, which was a 400 gigawatt hour per year goal that was in place 2015 through 2018. The utility has always met the goals. They're defined as goals, not requirements. But there are financial incentives for the utility and its shareholders for meeting or exceeding the goals, performance-based incentives. So the utility has a strong incentive to meet the goals, and they do 2-year DSM plans. The approval of the 2019-2020 plan was a bit delayed because of the timing of when the docket regarding the goals was finalized, but this spring their 2019-2020 plan was approved. That plan has a set of programs and funding levels that are expected to achieve the goal and produce savings of at least 500 gigawatt hours per year. And there's an increase in funding for electric efficiency programs. Funding had been about $75 million a year, and the budgets was increased to a bit over $90 million per year. That's just electric efficiency programs. If we add in demand response and their gas efficiency programs, total budgets around $120 million per year. There's expansion of C&I lighting, cooling, and strategic energy management programs in the new plan, a new thermostat optimization program, a number of interesting pilot programs as well in the 1920 plan. There's a geo-targeting pilot on a feeder that's nearing overcapacity, and a hope that through intensive efficiency and demand response, the utility can postpone the investment that would otherwise be required on that distribution feeder. There's also pilots around customer side batteries, EV charging, water heater, and behavioral demand response pilots that will be launched in the course of implementing the 1920 plan. Moving on to another related issue here in Colorado. Back in 2017, the Colorado Commission approved a policy of decoupling utility sales and revenues, policy that's been implemented in quite a few states. Xcel had proposed decoupling, and we had a docket, and the commission approved decoupling, but it wasn't exactly the form of decoupling that the utility wanted. It was based on total revenues, not revenues per customer. And in a recent rate case filing, this decoupling policy had not yet taken effect. It was going to take effect at the conclusion of the first rate case after decoupling was approved, and that rate case has not occurred yet, but is now getting underway. And in the rate case filing, Xcel has asked to not implement decoupling. We don't think their rationale is very compelling, and SWEEP and other interveners will be recommending that the commission move forward here with decoupling as had been approved, which is a policy we think will be useful for supporting strong energy efficiency programs going forward. And so wanted to mention that docket, which is the Xcel Energy rate case. Also thought I'd mention here that there's a second smaller investor-owned utility in Pueblo, Colorado, Black Hills Energy. They have about 100,000 customers in Colorado. Earlier this year, the commission approved a new 3-year DSM plan for Black Hills, which we were involved in, and we were able to get a significant increase in funding levels and savings goals, about a 25% increase relative to what the utility had proposed. So we had a good outcome there, and they're off and running and implementing a comprehensive efficiency and demand response plan. It's primarily energy efficiency programs. I thought I would mention one other interesting policy in Colorado that was part of a piece of legislation that was adopted earlier this year in the 2019 legislative session here. It's a provision in Senate Bill 236, which is a bill that is kind of an omnibus utility policy bill. And that bill includes adoption of a significant cost on carbon emissions and utility resource planning. It's not a carbon tax that customers would pay, but it's a value that is going to be used in all resource planning decisions to take into account the social cost of carbon. And the policy states that the commission will determine what the cost would be, but there's a floor in the legislation on the cost of $46 per ton of carbon dioxide, which is a fairly significant value. And the policy covers a number of areas and states that the carbon costs should be taken into account in not only supply side resource planning, but also in demand side planning and program evaluation. So this carbon cost will be used in future dockets looking at program cost effectiveness and setting of future energy savings goals, terms of what the cost-effective energy savings potential is, which will, I think, help us to maintain a high level of cost-effective savings in the future. So this will be implemented. We still need to complete a rulemaking to have the commission define what the actual costs will be, but we know there's a floor that they can't go below, $46 per ton. Any questions? Colorado related? I don't see any. So let me continue. Next up is Nevada. In Nevada, we have one major investor-owned utility, NV Energy, operating sort of separate companies in southern Nevada and northern Nevada, Nevada Power and Sierra Pacific Power. But they're now doing demand side management plans for the utility as a whole. Previously, we had separate plans for the two operating companies, but there's a new 2019 through 2021 DSM plan that was approved in the latter part of 2018. The plan increases demand side management funding by about 30% relative to what it had been, and increases energy savings targets, also a fairly significant bump up. Utility had been achieving savings of around 0.8 to 0.9% of sales, and the new target for 2019 through 2021 is savings of at least 1.15% of sales, 345 gigawatt hours per year. That's the average over the 3 years. And the plan includes restarting residential lighting, pool pumps, and low-income programs the utilities had run in the past, but had been eliminated in recent years. NV Energy has gone ahead in 2019 and ramped up their programs. The lighting program and pool pumps programs have gotten off the ground. The utility has not yet started a new low-income program, but instead has sort of ramped up support for energy efficiency and low-income in communities that have a lot of low-income households within other programs. So there's increased focus on getting participation from low-income households within the other programs, which the utility has determined is the kind of the most cost-effective way and most effective way to support increased participation in savings by low-income households. In a filing back in May, with a filing that involved amendments to the last integrated resource plan, NV Energy proposed adding one new program to its DSM portfolio starting in 2020, and that is a prepay metering program, which the utility ran as a pilot, and it has gotten approval to offer to all of its customers. They're calling the FlexPay program. And in this recent filing, the utility has asked the commission to allow the utility to include FlexPay as part of DSM and to add some promotion and incentive costs into the DSM plan to the tune of about $1.5 million per year to help the utility solicit participation in FlexPay. And they've also asked the commission to approve counting energy savings through third-party M&V within the energy savings they report as part of their DSM programs, so that this would be included within DSM, not the hardware costs, but promotion and some incentive costs, and allowing counting of energy savings. They've made it clear they would not count any savings during any disconnect periods, but simply the nature of a prepay program would be encouraging better management of energy use and conservation practices. They intend to kind of co-promote DSM programs and flex pay and do what they can to encourage flex pay participants to take advantage of other energy efficiency programs offered by the utility. So that proposal is pending before the commission. In addition, the utility files an update to its DSM programs, its approved DSM programs, every year on July 1st. We got a preview of their filing earlier this week. The utility will be proposing in this filing maintaining the savings targets and achieving the savings targets in its plan, but is asking for a reduction in budget levels. They've been working to reduce costs throughout the utility in the DSM area as well as other areas. The utility in Nevada has been hit with a significant number of large customers leaving their system. The large customers in Nevada can apply to exit from NV Energy as their power supplier. The companies that exit go to the commission and are assessed an exit fee, but a number of the large casinos and some other large customers have exited. Utilities trying to counter that by holding down rates as much as possible, and they've been working on budget cuts and keeping costs down as much as possible throughout the utility. And as a result, they've worked on some cost reductions in the DSM area and are proposing that in this filing. There'll be a docket on the proposed budget cuts that we'll participate in. We'll be potentially pushing back on cuts that we think are unjustified, and potentially arguing for a smaller budget reduction. The utility's proposing something like a $20 million reduction to the approved budget, which is close to a 30% reduction. So we'll see where that comes out here in a docket that will probably get completed before the end of the year. We'll also see what happens with their flex pay proposal, which is something they're proposing to add while at the same time proposing to cut funding levels for the approved DSM programs. And once again, they believe they can reach the savings targets that were approved in the 2019-2021 plan, but with a lower level of funding. So we'll need to look at, in detail at how they think they can do that, and we'll be involved in the docket, and we will push back as we think is appropriate. I still don't see any questions. Please, if there's anything that you want to ask, don't feel shy in sending me questions. On to New Mexico. New Mexico program plans and budgets are pretty stable here. The state has 3 investor-owned electric utilities and 1 regulated gas utility. The largest utility is PNM. They're in the middle of a DSM plan. In 2019, we had a new plan approved for El Paso Electric, one of the smaller IOUs down around Las Cruces. Their new 3-year plan pretty much maintains their current programs and calls for energy savings similar to what the utilities achieved in the past. This year we have new 3-year plans that have been filed by Southwestern Public Service, which is an Xcel Energy subsidiary, as well as the gas company. So dockets are getting underway for those utilities. SBS is proposing to add a new program for heat pump water heaters. They're expanding the LED lighting measures in their C&I lighting program and also adding a strategic energy management program. However, the utility had an air conditioner load control program, which they have found that is no longer cost effective. They're in an excess capacity position for what they believe will be about 8 years. So they don't think they have much value to be obtained from demand response in the short run. So their plan drops the load control program. I think the devices will stay attached to air conditioners for existing participants, and they may revive that program in the future, but for the time being, it would be dropped. The most interesting development in New Mexico is legislation that passed in the session, the legislative session that occurred earlier this year. SWEEP took the initiative to propose a number of amendments to our underlying energy efficiency legislation called the Efficient Use of Energy Act, which was first adopted around, I believe, 2007 and has been amended a number of times since then. The legislation as it existed prior to this year had energy efficiency requirements for the electric utilities that ran through 2020, but ended after 2020. These new amendments include energy efficiency requirements for the next 10 years, 2021 through 2030. The requirements for the first 5 years are included in the bill, 1% savings requirement per year, 5% savings after 5 years. The bill also requires the commission to complete a docket in 2025 to establish savings requirements for 2026 through 2030. And we got some pretty strong language requiring the commission to adopt savings requirements at the maximum cost-effective and achievable energy savings levels. So we were pleased with that policy. The legislation also allows funding levels to go as high as 5% of revenues for DSM programs, efficiency and demand response programs. Current policy is a fixed funding level of 3% of revenues. The new policy maintains 3% as a floor, but allows for approval of funding up to 5% of revenues. And in addition, the legislation includes a provision that directs the commission to approve a decoupling policy for any utility that requests it. PNM is a utility that has proposed decoupling in the past. It was denied by the commission, much to PNM and our dismay. And this legislation, which was supported by PNM includes this provision that says the commission must approve decoupling. They get to decide on the details, but they cannot reject decoupling altogether if a utility proposes it. We're now beginning a rulemaking at the PRC to put these new policies into the commission's rules. Hopefully get that done within the next 6 months. And we'll see a new DSM plan next year from PNM that will be responsive to these new policies. Their new plan will be for their programs for 3 years starting in 2021. Okay, continuing through the region, I'll talk finally about recent developments in Utah and Wyoming as well. Rocky Mountain Power is the one investor-owned electric utility in Utah. They're also the largest investor-owned electric utility in Wyoming, and many of their programs in Wyoming replicate what they're doing in Utah. As I said earlier, Rocky Mountain Power cut funding and energy savings in Utah in 2018 relative to what they had achieved in 2017. That was done in response to new savings targets specified in the utility's last integrated resource plan. The PacifiCorp, the parent company for Rocky Mountain Power, completes integrated resource plans every 2 years, and those plans include savings targets for DSM programs state by state. And the last IRP, given everything going on with the utilities, reduced load growth, expansion of renewable resources, low natural gas prices, the IRP called for a reduction in savings achievement in Utah. Ironically, the plan called for expansion of efficiency programs in Wyoming, but a reduction in Utah. And that was what motivated the utility to reduce its spending and energy savings. Energy savings were down about 24% year to year. So they had cut back some of the incentives, particularly commercial industrial sector. They had some limits on incentives for LED and HVAC measures. They also did less with strategic energy management in 2018. This is a strong program for them in previous years. They didn't eliminate any programs, but they trimmed some of the incentives and some of the marketing, and pretty much came in at the targeted level. The situation in Utah is we do not have separate DSM plan dockets. The commission reviews and basically signs off on the savings targets coming out of the utilities IRP. And so those are the targets for the utilities programs. For 2019, Rocky Mountain Power's budget is up in Utah, but the energy savings target is pretty much the same as in 2018. As I mentioned, in Wyoming, the spending levels and savings targets are up And we do have a 2018 through 2020 DSM plan. It wasn't approved until, I believe, around the middle of last year, but we should see a bit of a bump up in spending and savings in Wyoming. In over the past roughly year, PacifiCorp has been working on their next IRP, which they expect to complete and issue this August. We've been working on that on that plan and making input and trying to convince the powers that be at PacifiCorp to include a robust set of energy efficiency options and reasonable costs and savings potential levels in our states. But we're concerned that given what the utility's doing, they're pretty much on their own in carrying out this resource plan. They do have many meetings with stakeholders and share key inputs as well as preliminary analysis, and they look at lots of different scenarios within their planning process, but we're concerned that the savings targets could decline further. These will be the targets that will apply in 2020 and 2021. So we'll see what comes out here later this summer. And, we're doing our best to try to fend off any further declines in the targets for their programs. I note also the utility is fairly keen on supporting high efficiency heat pumps for both space and water heating as energy efficiency measures, beneficial electrification in buildings. They're supportive of electric vehicles and providing some funding for EV charging infrastructure. The current policy in Utah is the utility is not allowed to promote fuel switching. So their incentives for heat pumps are only for homes with electric heating already. And we expect that they will be bringing forward a proposal either to the legislature or the commission asking for approval for heat pumps with fuel switching so that they would be able to promote high efficiency heat pumps that would be substituting for gas heating, which is the predominant heating type in Utah. So we're keeping an eye on that. We at SWEEP are supportive of beneficial electrification where it's cost effective and reduces greenhouse gas emissions, but we don't want to see it coming at the expense of funding for cost-effective energy efficiency and demand response programs. So we'll be doing our best to be supportive, but hoping to get an outcome that doesn't sort of rob Peter to pay Paul and cut back traditional efficiency programs. And we're doing that throughout the region. We're working on this issue also in Arizona at this very time here, trying to get the commission to approve utility plans for supporting electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging infrastructure, but having the funding coming separately and not coming out of limited DSM funds. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. I still don't see any questions. I hope my question panel here is working. But let me continue. I got a couple of concluding slides. I wanted to just highlight some of the issues here around cost effectiveness in this region, as well as other regions. We're facing declining avoided cost as a result of low fuel prices, falling capacity costs, and general lack of load growth. And so that's leading to less value for energy savings and peak demand reduction. One of the things that we're working on to try to counter that trend is to make sure that we're valuing all of the benefits, including environmental benefits, when we're looking at the benefit side of the ledger in cost benefit analysis, including either non-energy benefit adders or specific values such as valuation of avoided carbon emissions. I already mentioned the new policy in Colorado on that front. We've also been able to get approval of non-energy benefit adders in Nevada. That happened last year and is for the first time, non-energy benefit adders are factored into cost effectiveness analysis. We've had that policy in Colorado, and last year we were able to get an increase in the non-energy benefit adders in Colorado. And we'll continue to work on these policies in other states. The discount rate that's used in DSM cost effectiveness analysis is another issue that we're focused on. We've had an issue in New Mexico for a number of years where the commission was supporting use of a tax adjusted discount rate in DSM cost effectiveness analysis, which led to a higher than kind of normal discount rate. It was a tax adjusted weighted average cost of capital for the utilities. And this legislation that I mentioned that was adopted earlier this year includes a provision stating that in the future, the discount rate should be no greater than the unadjusted weighted average cost of capital. So we fixed that issue, which should help us on cost effectiveness analysis. And we are looking at discount rates in other states as well and arguing for potentially using discount rates that are less than the utilities weighted average cost of capital, a social discount rate, for example. And then we're also working to try to get cost effectiveness analysis done at a higher level. So rather than looking at individual programs or even individual measures, that the cost effectiveness screening would be done at a more integrated level, such as all residential programs or all commercial programs needing to pass cost effectiveness screening, which could enable us to include a broader set of measures within energy efficiency portfolios. Okay, wow. My assistant just brought me a set of questions here. They weren't showing up on my screen. I apologize. We're about 5 minutes from the end time here. So what I'm going to do is reply in writing to everybody with the questions and responses to the questions that I got here today. Let me wrap up the the PowerPoint, and I will reply to all the questions. You can keep sending questions, but I wasn't able to see them. Something wasn't working on my computer, and I apologize for that. And we will be making the slides available as well as a recording of the webinar. We'll be sending out a email later this week with the link, and we'll probably have the responses to the questions. One of the things I do in these webinars is poll our utilities to ask about RFPs that are coming out in the next 6 months. This chart shows what I got back from the utilities, a couple of RFPs planned at Xcel, a number of RFPs at NV Energy. You can see the topics. PNM is issuing an RFP, I believe, in the first 2 weeks of July regarding behavioral programs. They do not have any behavioral programs in their portfolio, and they'll be soliciting proposals for both residential and C&I behavioral programs. And finally, Rocky Mountain Power plans, I believe, 2 RFPs for evaluation contractors for evaluating, I believe, home energy reports and then their C&I programs later this year. Just a quick summary here. There's some good news and bad news. We do have energy savings and savings goals moving up, particularly in Colorado, Nevada, and at Salt River Project in Arizona. But we're facing some challenges and downward movement at APS, Tucson Electric Power, and Rocky Mountain Power. Budgets and energy savings are relatively steady in New Mexico, and with the new legislation could actually see a bit of a bump up in the next few years in terms of funding and savings levels in New Mexico. Set of major issues and uncertainties, which all of you probably are well aware of. Uncertainties around what's going to happen with the ESA 2020 light bulb standards, the duration of this large opportunity with the LED transition and commercial industrial lighting, and the general issue of how to maintain energy efficiency program savings over time, particularly if we lose potential from LEDs. We're seeing growing interest and expansion of demand response, particularly in our region where there's high and growing penetration of renewables and utilities beginning to work on using demand response to help with renewables integration, looking at demand response to help, for example, with the drop off in generation from solar, as at the end of the day when the sun is going down. By the way, SWEEP is working on a report that should be out perhaps at the end of the summer, early fall, on developments in our region related to demand response and how utilities are using and thinking about demand response, particularly to help with integration of high levels of renewables. So keep an eye out for that. There's this general question of beneficial electrification, both with respect to EVs and heat pumps in buildings, and is that something utilities will do within or outside of DSM programs? Of course, we're hoping that we can do this, but not at the expense of funding for efficiency programs. And then the general issue of declining avoided cost and how best to respond to that. So that's it. Thank you very much. Oh, I did want to mention for everyone the annual workshop that we put on in November for our allies, where you get an an opportunity to interact with the leaders of the efficiency programs in our region. The 2019 workshop will take place November 7th and 8th, Thursday all day, November 7th, and Friday morning, November 8th. And we're holding it here in Colorado in the Denver area. We'll be at a nice property in Broomfield, Colorado, just north of Denver. So we'll be getting an email out on that shortly with the date, and we're working on the program. We hope to have another good workshop and strong participation, strong program, and hope to see all of you at the workshop. Okay, thanks everyone for participating. We're at the top of the hour, so I'm gonna stop it here, and we'll get responses to your questions out shortly, certainly before the end of the week. And have a good summer. Bye now.